3,000 people would file into a single windowless stone hall at night. They had fasted for days. They had walked 14 miles from Athens in a procession. They had been handed a barley drink that some modern chemists, including the man who synthesized LSD, believe was psychoactive. The doors closed. Something happened in the dark. They came out, in Cicero's words, with a hope that endures beyond death. And not one of them, across 2,000 years of practice, ever told anyone what it was. This story does not start with the night in the hall. It starts with a grieving mother and a missing daughter. The Greeks believed the mysteries had been given to humanity by the goddess Demeter in gratitude after her daughter Persephone was returned to her from the underworld. In the myth, Hades abducts Persephone while she is gathering flowers. Demeter wanders the earth searching for her, refusing to let crops grow, and a great famine descends. The gods are forced to negotiate. Persephone returns, but because she has eaten pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she must spend a portion of each year below. 6 months, beneath. Spring and summer when she returns. Autumn and winter when she descends. And in the version of the story the Greeks honored at Eleusis, Demeter, before her grief lifts, pauses at the town of Eleusis, 14 miles west of Athens. She teaches the local rulers how to perform a set of rites in her honor. Those rites become the mysteries. That is the founding myth. The historical sanctuary at Eleusis is older than written Greek history. Archaeological evidence at the site goes back to the late Bronze Age, around 1500 BCE, during the Mycenaean period. By the 7th century BCE, the mysteries had been formalized into a state-supervised festival under Athenian control, and they continued without serious interruption for the next 1,000 years. Romans participated. Emperors were initiated. The cult outlasted the polis system that birthed it, outlasted the Macedonian conquest, outlasted the Roman annexation of Greece, and was finally ended only by Christian imperial decree in the late 4th century of the Common Era. 2,000 years of continuous ritual practice, and no surviving description of what happened at its center. The structure of the ritual is, by contrast, well documented. There were 2 cycles. The lesser mysteries took place in early spring, in Athens, and served as a preparatory initiation, open to almost anyone who could swear the oath and pay the fee. Initiates of the lesser were called mystai. The greater mysteries took place in late September, in the Athenian month of Bodromion, over 9 days. Only those who had already passed through the lesser could attend. The greater mysteries opened on the 15th of Bodromion at the Eleusinian in Athens, the city temple of Demeter, where the priests of the Eumolpidae and Charybdis clans formally announced the rites and administered the oath of secrecy. On the second day, the initiates walked down to the sea at Phaleron and bathed, each carrying a young pig that would be sacrificed for personal purification. The next 2 days were given to public sacrifices in Athens and to fasting. On the 19th of Bodromion, the procession began. The procession walked the sacred way. According to the surviving sources, it was approximately 14 miles from the Athenian Eleusinian to the sanctuary at Eleusis. The marchers carried sacred objects, sealed inside woven baskets called kistai, that had been brought from Eleusis to Athens at the start of the festival, and now were being carried home. They sang. They mocked passers-by at certain bridges, in a traditional ritual jeering meant to release tension. They reached Eleusis at nightfall. They lit torches. Once inside the sanctuary, the fast was broken by the drinking of the kykeon. The surviving sources name 3 ingredients: barley, water, and pennyroyal mint. Initiates would recite a formula that has come down to us through a fragment quoted by Clement of Alexandria. I have fasted. I have drunk the kykeon. I have taken from the kist, and after working with it, have placed it back in the basket. After the kykeon, the initiates entered the Telesterion. The Telesterion was a windowless stone hall, square in plan, 54 meters on each side, with tiered seating on the interior walls. The capacity has been estimated at approximately 3,000. The roof was supported by a forest of internal columns, and the only ceremonial light came from torches, and from a small central skylight called the opeion. In the middle of the floor stood a small enclosed structure called the anaktoron, the Holy of Holies, which only the chief priest, the Hierophant, was permitted to enter. What happened inside the Telesterion across the next 1 or 2 nights is the part we do not have. The ancient sources are unanimous in describing the experience in 3 categories, but they refuse to name the contents of any of the 3. There were ta legomena, the things said. There were ta dromena, the things done. And there were ta deiknemena, the things shown. The final revelation, the highest grade of the initiation, was called epoptia, which translates roughly as the seeing. What we do have are the witnesses. The witnesses are not silent. They speak constantly about the mysteries. They simply refuse to describe them. Pindar, in a fragment preserved by Clement of Alexandria, writes, Blessed is he who has seen these things before he goes beneath the earth. He knows the end of life. He knows its God-given beginning. Sophocles, in a fragment from a lost play, writes, "Thrice blessed are those mortals who have seen these rites before going to Hades. For them alone there is life. For the rest there is misery." Plato refers to the mysteries in the Phaedrus and the Phaedo. In the Phaedrus he calls the highest mysteries the most blessed of all initiations, in which the soul, freed from the body, sees the eternal forms in their pure light. In the Phaedo he uses the language of the mysteries as a metaphor for philosophy itself, framing the death of the philosopher as the long-awaited initiation. Aristotle adds a different kind of witness. In a fragment of his lost work on philosophy, preserved later by the 5th century writer Synesius, Aristotle reports that the initiates at Eleusis were not expected to learn anything in the discursive sense. They were expected, in his phrase, not to learn but to undergo. The Greek words are mathein and pathein, to learn and to suffer, or more precisely, to undergo an experience. Aristotle's claim is that the mysteries did not deliver propositional content. They delivered a condition of the soul. Whatever the legomena said, whatever the dromena performed, whatever the deiknomena showed, the point was the change in the initiate, not the transfer of a doctrine. Cicero, in his treatise De Legibus, written around 50 BCE, gives the testimony that modern scholars cite most often. He was himself initiated, probably during his student years in Greece. In Book 2, Section 36 he writes, "For among the many excellent and indeed divine institutions which your Athens has brought forth and contributed to human life, none, in my opinion, is better than those mysteries. For by their means we have been brought out of our barbarous and savage mode of life, and educated and refined to a state of civilization. And as the rites are called initiations, so in very truth we have learned from them the beginnings of life, and have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with a better hope." If you are finding this useful, there are more videos like this on the channel about ancient mystery traditions, and the texts that document them. Cicero does not say what the mysteries showed him. He says only what they changed in him. He died by his own report, with a better hope. The same elliptical pattern runs through every testimony we have. Aeschylus, the tragic poet, was, according to one ancient anecdote, nearly killed by an Athenian mob for reportedly revealing something of the mysteries in one of his plays. He defended himself by claiming he had not known the material was secret. The charge was dropped. But the story itself, true or embellished, illustrates how heavily the prohibition weighed. You could die for revealing the mysteries. You could die for entering the sanctuary without being initiated. The penalty was not theoretical. In 415 BCE, on the eve of the Sicilian expedition that would eventually break Athenian power, the Athenian general Alcibiades was accused of having parodied the Eleusinian rites at a private symposium. The accusation came on top of a separate scandal involving the desecration of statues of Hermes throughout the city. Alcibiades sailed for Sicily before the trial could proceed, was condemned to death in absentia, his property confiscated, and his name publicly cursed by the priests of Eleusis. He defected to Sparta and never returned to Athens as a citizen. Whether or not Alcibiades had actually parodied the mysteries is still debated. The Athenian state took the charge so seriously that it crippled its own military command on the eve of a major campaign. A century and a half later, in 201 BCE, the Roman historian Livy records that 2 young men from Acarnania entered the sanctuary at Eleusis during the festival, unaware that they were forbidden to do so as uninitiated foreigners. They asked questions that gave them away. The priests sentenced them to death. They were executed. The discipline of the mysteries held for nearly 2,000 years, not because anyone was watching all the time, but because the consequences for breaking the silence were severe and known. The end came not from inside but from outside. In 392 of the Common Era, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I issued an edict reinforcing the prohibition of prayers or sacrifices at non-Christian temples across the empire. The mysteries, like every other pagan rite, were now legally extinguished. The festival appears to have continued in some reduced form for a short while longer. Then, in 396, the army of Alaric I, king of the Visigoths, swept through Attica during its campaign against the Eastern Roman Empire. The sanctuary at Eleusis was looted and burned. The Telesterion was destroyed and never rebuilt. The last Hierophant died not long after, and with him, according to the historian Eunapius, the active tradition of the mysteries ended. What did the initiates see in the dark? The ancient sources do not say. The modern hypothesis that has drawn the most attention was published in 1978 by 3 authors. The first was R. Gordon Wasson, an American ethnomycologist and former vice president of J.P. Morgan, who had spent decades studying the ritual use of psychoactive fungi in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. The second was Albert Hofmann, the Swiss chemist at Sandow's laboratories, who in 1938 had first synthesized lysergic acid diethylamide and discovered its psychoactive properties 5 years later. The third was Carl A.P. Ruck, a classicist at Boston University. Their book was titled The Road to Eleusis, and its central claim was that the kykeon contained ergot, a fungus that grows on barley and produces psychoactive alkaloids structurally similar to LSD. The argument has not been settled. On its side, the chemistry is real. Ergot does grow on barley. The relevant alkaloids do exist in ergot. Hofmann himself, who had spent his career studying these compounds, judged the chemistry plausible. And in recent years, according to the Wikipedia entry on the kykeon, archaeologists working at the Mas Castellar site in Girona, Spain, at a temple associated with Demeter and Persephone, have reported finding ergot fragments inside a ceremonial vase and in the dental calculus of a young man buried at the site. This suggests at minimum that ergot was being consumed in a ritual Demeter context outside of Eleusis. Against the hypothesis, no chemical residue from the actual Eleusinian sanctuary has so far confirmed the presence of ergot in the kykeon vessels. Skeptics also point out that the mysteries were a collective experience involving roughly 3,000 people of varying ages and constitutions, and that the dosage challenges of administering a powerful and unpredictable ergoline compound to such a group without producing the convulsive and often fatal symptoms of ergot poisoning are not trivial. The hypothesis remains, at the time of writing, contested. It is a serious proposal made by serious scholars. It is not a proven account. What we have left, then, is the architecture and the testimony. The Telesterion stands in ruins at modern Eleusina,